Welcome back to Sun, Sand, and Sold. I'm Josh Tomey with my co-host David Haber. David, good afternoon, and welcome back.
Nice to see you, Josh.
It's great to see you. We're starting by ourselves today, but we're going to be welcoming a very special guest who is part of probably one of the most active and maybe one of the largest neighborhood associations here in Miami, the Brickell Homeowners Association, Ernesto Cuesta. And we're going to be talking to him about what's going on in Brickell. There's been so much in the headlines that implicates Brickell on different levels. Obviously, we've heard about some of the
traffic,
special assessment crisis that was making headline news, the traffic stuff, the sinking condos, the insurance. We could probably spend half a day with him. I'm sure he's fielding concerns, complaints, and questions from his constituents all over that neighborhood. But I'm interested to hear what your thoughts about Brickell in particular are. And I know you have a lot of dealings with Brickell associations here in Miami. And what makes Brickell different from the rest of Miami? Because it is different, and what makes it different, and some of the things that we're going to be talking to Ernesto about.
Well, Brickell has a lot of the young people that come from, I guess, urban centers from all over the world.
Isn't everyone young compared to you? I mean, is that sort of like saying?
Yeah, I would say that now that I turned 65 a couple of weeks ago, most people are younger than me.
I'm just going to say this for everybody. For 65, you wear it well.
Oh, thank you. That's
not
so
a lot of
sweet.
65-year-olds, by the way, could pull that shirt off. And I realize that every episode, and forgive us for belaboring the point, but every episode we have to call David's shirt out. And actually, I think today's is...
I've worn this one once before, but I just felt very festive. Yesterday was the Haber Law holiday party.
I'm going to call this one of the more digestible shirts. I mean,
it's edible. If you like edible flowers, they're very edible.
So I do want to call out my friends at Major Food Group, at Mario Carbone in particular. I am sporting his Our Lady of Rocco baby cashmere sweater today, and for that group and for all the evenings of fantastic Caesar salad, spicy rigatoni, and veal parm. You
cannot go wrong with chicken or veal parm.
It's a holiday homage to Major Food Group. So,
although I will say that the spicy rigatoni is hard to pass.
It is hard to pass.
But that's why, as a Haber, I order what I want, and I have you order what I want, and that way I get to take part of what's on your plate. That's a very Haberish thing to do.
It's the problem with having a friend who's also a very successful attorney is you get negotiated out of things without even knowing it, and
it's something I learned from my father, how to order for the rest of the table to make sure I get to taste everything.
Well, certainly at Carbone the portions are not short, but yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, obviously Brickell demographically is very different,
and it's very international, and it's very dense. It's very much like a New York City vibe because there are so many buildings now going up, and they're so close together that you do see a neighbor 100 feet away on their own balcony. It never was that way before in Miami.
But what difference do you think that makes? I
don't know. It's just an urban feel. They have restaurants. They have bars. There's a real walking scene there, especially with that area that was developed. What's the name of that area?
The city center?
City center. I mean, there's so much. And truthfully, trying to drive anywhere near city center or Brickell is, in my opinion, insanity.
Right. Well, that is a more pedestrian friendly section. It is much more Manhattan-like. I also think that the number of high-rise, they're getting higher and higher. It's really becoming like a skyscraper kind of place. It really is. And I have to imagine that there is a higher proportionality of full-time residents in Brickell compared to a lot of the neighborhoods in Miami-Dade.
Oh, I would agree with that because you have these young working people and they're working. So they're literally.
It's more of a live-work condition in Brickell, for sure.
For sure.
And obviously that supports that food and beverage industry, the fitness and health facilities that are sort of everywhere all over Brickell. I mean, obviously it's Miami, and so that's a big piece of the culture as well. But connecting it to what we're going to be talking today about, I got to imagine that some of these issues almost hit closer to home, no pun intended, for these owners. They're not transient. They're not seasonal. This is probably
a lot of them are
their major investment. I mean, some of them may be transplants.
Yeah, but a lot of them are renting to these young people.
Correct.
These young people cannot afford to own $3 million condos, so they're renting for what used to be $3,000 a month and is now $4,500, $5,000, $6,000.
But let's not forget, though, that those rents are directly impacted by those condo fees and special assessments. So they may be renting, but their rents are going up along with those maintenance fees.
They may not be renting for much longer.
Well, and so obviously we know that, like 1060 Brickell was in the news significantly a couple of weeks ago regarding the hubbub around their special assessment, and obviously the outcome of that still pending. The interesting thing is, how many of those homeowners there, and I have no idea, but how many of those homeowners there are investors who are renting and saying, look, this is not just about my personal investment. This is also my ability to continue to monetize the investment through rentals, which obviously that activity in Brickell is heavy. And when you're levying those assessments, when the maintenance fees are going up as a result of Senate Bill 4D, as a result of the SERS inspections and the outcome there, that they're going to have to pass those expenses on in rent. And it may prove to be more unaffordable, which also, through some of my predictions on my professional side, is opening up more opportunity in the multifamily market.
Well, I agree with you. And I think that a lot of those investors bought those investments at a time where reserves were being waived and they were doing a financial analysis. A lot of Latin Americans parking money in Miami, in South Florida, and they were making a very simple, mathematical equation. My mortgage payment is $4,000 a month. My maintenance is $1,500 a month. I can rent for $6,000 a month, and I'm good.
Right.
But now they have a $60,000 special assessment, and now all of a sudden it doesn't look as good.
Right. And the maintenance fee is up by 50%.
Right.
Insurance, has no forecast of,
right.
It's slightly softer this year. Again, I've had to explain to a number of clients and other constituents that, a softer insurance market does not mean it's going down. It means it's just not going up by as much as it might have last year.
Right. And every year is a different story. And as we spoke on the insurance discussion, it's a worldwide marketplace now. So It doesn't even matter if there's no hurricanes in South Florida, if they're in Southwest Florida, if there's a earthquake in California, if there's something going on in Europe, it's going to affect all of the markets around the world.
Right. And I just for our viewers and listeners, please go back and listen to one of our episodes from last season with Joe Knapp from Brown & Brown Insurance, who really discussed the academics of that and how the reinsurance market was really
and it's the reinsurance, which is worldwide, and it's not local. And that's, to most people, that's a little shocking. The average consumer doesn't realize that your rates on homeowners insurance, especially for high rise, is completely dependent on reinsurance markets, which are affected by events throughout the world. Right. I don't think anybody, really, your average citizen, would realize that.
Absolutely not. I think until I got into this business, I never would have understood that. I also wouldn't have understood that condo is rated differently than multifamily. That, when you have a single commercial owner and a multifamily building, an apartment building, that despite the fact that by look and by feel they're almost identical, that there's two totally different insurance rating practices, and that there's an impact there. Again, potentially opening up multifamily in a more significant way.
One of the reasons for that, of course, is because when the developer owns the multifamily, they're presumably maintaining it. They don't have to talk to a board. They don't have to get owner votes. It's real simple. I'm fixing the roof.
Right.
That's it.
And they also, in all likelihood, especially if you own a high rise, probably own more than one. Not many property owners who own a high rise only own one high rise, and so they also can spread that risk across a portfolio. Maybe
I didn't even think about that, but that's true.
Maybe even in the form of a captive when you're talking about a very large owner, and in those cases they're able to spread that risk across multiple properties.
And if they own multiple properties in different jurisdictions and different cities, now you're spreading it across different markets completely.
Sure. If I own two in New York and two in Miami, obviously I get to offset some of the risk in a cat zone like Miami, a catastrophe zone, obviously because of hurricanes here with what's in New York.
Yeah, you have to be careful because cat is like for Cat 5 for hurricane,
right? Not
cat for catastrophe.
Right. So in the insurance market, they will call it a cat zone or a cat region, which is not the same thing as Cat 5, which is obviously
which is not the same as Cat 5, which is the wiring for your Wi-Fi.
That actually is Cat 5. CAD is computer-aided design. That's like,
Okay, so this is why you do the technical stuff and I do the jokes.
This is, and Abraham, you're always welcome to, our engineer here. We'll straighten that out. When before we went on today, I couldn't hear anything out of my monitor. Just they weren't plugged in. So that's how sophisticated we're operating.
I thought it was CAD 5.
CAT 5, Category 5 cable, and which, by the way, is also old technology. Really, it's Category 6 now.
Well, I just got fiber optic,
which is completely different because we're talking about networking, not signal carry. Abraham knows what I'm talking about. There he is. Thumbs up from the
shout out to AT&T for coming to Miami Beach with fiber optic.
Did they finally do it?
Finally.
It actually made me think next season, I think we should do an episode on video and data, because that is one of the most.
It's kind of cool.
It is, but it's also one of those issues that so many people in condos and even in single family homes deal with. And Miami is we're
very behind the times.
We are. When I first moved here, it was like, and I'm not going to name companies right now, but
don't name names.
The beach in Aventura, where I was when I first moved here,
and it's a monopoly,
had one company.
Yeah, it's a monopoly,
and it wasn't like one of the big ones. It was sort of this, kind of a local operator, and then eventually the bigger carriers.
Charter Cable.
Anyways, one of the bigger companies found its way in, but it's a really interesting proposition to get into that. And then there's Hotwire in Brickell, which in its early days was reputationally not great. But I got to tell you,
they're now huge.
They're huge, and reputationally have improved a lot. And so I think it's
shout out to Kat Sosa, one of my former associates, who now is a big shot over at Hotwire.
Absolutely,
big hot shot.
Absolutely. So look, David, getting back to Brickell, I think for me, off the top of my head, and I've managed properties in Brickell. I've certainly watched its expansion. When I first moved here to open the Four Seasons Hotel right in the middle of Brickell, and that was 2003, Brickell looked a whole lot different than it does now. And we know the traffic issues. We've talked.
What about
We've talked about the flood. We've talked about the flooding issues.
Oh my God! How do you fix the flooding on Brickell?
Right, but again,
hovercraft.
From your perspective, as somebody who represents associations and who participates in a lot of neighborhood association meetings, are those things really even in the purview of a neighborhood association, or is that really saying, look, what are they going to do about traffic? What are they going to do about flooding? I mean, is that city interaction? Sure, but are they really engaging in infrastructure conversations?
It's infrastructure, and I think it is a conversation. I can't wait to talk to Ernesto about it, and Vicky Lopez when we have her on, because a lot of her district is Brickell.
Right.
And the reality is it's a federal, state, and local government issue, but it has to be addressed. It cannot be ignored. I know the Metro Mover or the People Mover goes there, but what are we going to do about these concentrated urban centers? We've got to figure it out, and we've got to figure it out for flooding and sewer.
Well,
sooner rather than later.
And last season, obviously, when we talked to Jeff Burkow about the public transportation issue, infrastructure issue, got a lot of interesting insight there. And again, a shout out to Jeff, and encourage our viewers and listeners to take a look at that episode as well, which was very interesting. I know you and I, for as deep as we run in this industry, learned a lot in that episode in terms of why we are where we are. And here we are almost a year later. Not much difference. Not a lot of change, right?
Not a lot of change in any of the issues regarding traffic or flooding. And I think it's going to take a symposium of the Beacon Council, the state and local government officials, the businesses, to say, we need a 30, 40-year plan on flooding and traffic. What are we going to do? They got to start now.
Almost a little like the county is doing with the airport right now. I mean, obviously, massive multi-billion dollar renovation and expansion plan for the airport, which is
same with the seaport.
Sorely needed. The seaport's
redone a lot of it. If you look, and by the way, those
seaport 20 years later, from when I moved here, the seaport's a different seaport altogether.
And the buildings are beautiful.
Yeah, they're gorgeous. They're gorgeous. Yeah.
NCL.
If we can do with the airport what was
done
Royal
at the Caribbean,
what was done at the seaport,
and Carnival,
for sure. So I guess what I'd also be asking you as a representative of so many of these associations is, what do you encourage associations, individual condominium associations, to do with those neighborhood associations? Obviously, we're speaking with Brickell Homeowners Association today. We know that there's some strong homeowners associations on the
They have one in Sunny Isles. They have one
South of Fifth Neighborhood Association. I know carries a lot of weight in the city of Miami Beach,
and they have the one up in Edgewater.
Right. what level of interaction? What level of interaction should a condominium association board or its residents be having with their neighborhood association, and to what end? To what impact?
So I do think, having gone to some of those meetings, I can tell you that the Biscayne, South of Fifth, Sunny Isles, Brickell, they bring the police commander from the police that is in charge of that area. They'll bring the fire chief. They'll bring the state representative. They'll bring the local city or county commissioner. And they will allow the residents to share their feelings and their concerns with the representatives who are representing that district. They will come up with, and we'll ask Ernesto this, do they come up with a list of goals for the year or long-range goals, and how do they go about pushing those goals? I would say any condominium building that's not part of their neighborhood association is making a huge mistake, because there's a tremendous ability to tap into information from other buildings and what they're doing, tap into technology, and tap into political impact. Right. Because remember, you're not talking about 300 people and 300 votes. You're talking about, we'll ask Ernesto, how many votes are there? Are there 30,000 votes? Right. Are there 20,000 votes?
Right.
That's a lot of votes. And if you're
with the concentration in Brickell, that's probably why they carry as much weight as they do, is imagining those buildings when you've got 500-600 doors and 1,000 residents, you've got some sway.
40, 50, 60 buildings.
Right.
You're talking about potentially 20,000 votes,
right,
or more.
How often do you see local politicians show up at those neighborhood meetings?
All the time.
City commission,
county
state
commission,
representatives,
state representatives, senators,
Lopez certainly
Pizzo, all of them.
And you connect that with population density and saying they're not stupid. They know they got to show up where their constituents are.
Of course. And they don't just show up for their constituents. They go around to all the condo associations, because Pizzo and Lopez and the fine representative from the west coast of Florida are all the ones, and I can't remember her name, I apologize right now. They're the ones who are pushing the condo bills and trying to get things straightened out. And the rest of their colleagues are like, okay, this is too complicated. You all deal with this, and you let us know when you've got it figured out.
Right.
But they're going around and they're getting the feedback, and they're getting the feedback at those neighborhood association level. You're not going to go condo to condo. You know, it's like the low-hanging fruit again. We talked about that with technology yesterday. Why go building to building when you can go to an entire group and get 20,000 people all at once?
Right. You know, some of the criticism I've heard of the neighborhood association meetings is saying, honestly, it's just window dressing. Yeah, the cops show up. Yeah, the politicians show up. They're there mostly for political purposes. You know, these neighborhood associations don't necessarily have a lot of authority. They can't do much. It's not like they're a legislative body. I mean, it sounds to me like you're saying not true. There's some substance there, but you need an agenda. You need to understand what you're working for, what the goal is, right?
You gotta, and that's what we're going to ask Ernesto. What are their goals?
Right.
You know, and I think flooding and traffic has to be two of the big goals. I just can't imagine it's not. And of course, insurance is a big issue for them. And population density and how they're going to deal with new buildings coming up, because there's still cranes.
Right. And I do want to tap on the issue that, got raised again in the Herald and well beyond, certainly a lot of the local
sinking
TV.
Buildings?
No, I mean, that and about 1060 Brickell. I mean, because, and again, not knowing the outcome of that yet, but about saying, I got to imagine from a neighborhood association perspective, they have to cringe when they see that stuff in the news, because it only has people think, when is this going to happen to my building? And they're asking those kind of questions. And I wonder what reliance people in these buildings have on their neighborhood association to help give them guidance, given the fact that they do have that legislative connectivity in ways that individual buildings tend not to.
Well, I will say this, and it's not about 1060 Brickell in particular. It's really about the fact that boards have tremendous discretion and business judgment rule to protect them from the decisions of, listening to the engineer, following the engineer's advice. And if the other owners say, no, we can do it for half the price and we can get, John Doe contractor to do it for 3/4 of the price, that may be the case, but it doesn't mean the board has to listen to that, because the board has the right to select the contractor they feel is most appropriate to get the job done, not necessarily the cheapest contractor,
right.
Maybe one with a better reputation, better warranty, there are different factors that go, how quickly they can do the job.
Right, like we talked with Paul Schwartz about in a previous episode in terms of saying, what are they?
Well, you really are interacting.
Well, what are they bringing to the table?
Yeah,
I mean, in terms of saying this is, is
it just price?
Right. And if it's just price, that's not the end all be all. That's a real mistake.
People think it is, but I want our viewership to know that any contractor can change order you to death.
Right.
And now you're fighting change order saying, no, this is included in the contract. No, it's not included. This is extra. This is special. So you've got to be very careful. You can't just go to the low bidder. You have to get a reputable contractor. You have to get someone who can get bonded. You have to get someone that's done similar types of projects. Right. You have to get someone who can do it in the time frame you want it done.
Which is why, again, apropos to the point you made in that previous episode of why having good association counsel looking at those agreements.
And owner's reps and a good architect or engineer. Right. All of it. It all goes together. And a good board that's proactive and understands. Right. Of course, you're going to get pushback from the owners when you come up and say, we need a $30 million assessment. Of course, owners are going to say, well, maybe we don't. Maybe we only need 15 million or 20 million.
This wasn't transparent. Was it not transparent because you weren't paying attention, had no idea it could rise to that level, or was it truly not transparent?
Right. And I whenever Haber Law represents an association, transparency and communication again, and I've used this phrase before, effective communication. There's a difference between communication and effective communication. And effective communication is such that it goes on the website. There's a letter that goes out. There's a meeting.
Well, I love what you've said. Visuals, right? I mean, you said that on an episode, and you said,
PowerPoint,
show them the picture, because you know what? They're not going to crawl in that interstitial space, on the top level of the garage.
They're not going to look at the peeling roof membrane,
right? And rest in peace, all those people who lost their lives at Champlain Towers and Surfside. I don't have a lot of the history, and you might have more than I do, about what it was that they were presented with that had that association resistant to some of the work that was needed to be done there. Because I know that was also a multi-million-dollar assessment pending, if you will.
Well, and you had the water pouring out of the pool in the interstitial space into the garage with that chlorinated water, and of course salt water from the ocean. And of course there were also issues with respect to original construction, et cetera, et cetera. Total tragedy. It reminded me, and I think you and I have spoken about this before. It reminded me of the Challenger disaster with the space shuttle, where it's not one thing that went wrong.
A whole sequence of events.
A whole sequence
perfect storm.
Perfect storm.
Right.
And you hope you never see that again. And
well, on that note, and before we go to break and welcome Ernesto from Brickell Homeowners Association, I did want to ask you on this issue of the sinking buildings. It dawned on me as I was reading the articles about it, not only in prep for this episode, but obviously for the work that you and I do in general. Was that responsible journalism? Because as you dive into the articles and you dive into, some of the substance of it, there's, some qualification statements that says, well, this stuff kind of happens, and there's, some of the engineering features are programmatic that way. It makes me wonder, given the background of loss of life in Surfside, whether or not that was thoughtful journalism or was it inflammatory. And I'm not saying.
Are you talking about the recent article about sinking?
And I'm not saying that I have an absolute opinion on it, but it did dawn on me to say, gosh, in the context of what we're dealing with economically, the loss of life in the background, and the fact that one of the things that obviously we know about Surfside, and you certainly very well because of how front page, literally and metaphorically, you were on that issue, that some of the building settling at Champlain Towers was potentially named as causal. As to whether it was or not, again, I'm not here to.
I think it had a lot to do with the fact that the pool deck and the building structure were on the same slab.
As we said, perfect storm. However, it's very easy to imagine why it conjures the specter of Surfside when you hear high rise sinking. In the context of the engineering crisis that we're going through right now, it's hard to not immediately.
We might want to
get
a geotechnical engineer on, and presuming we don't fall asleep during the episode.
I was going to say that is going to be a page turner of a book.
Well, but it's in
Abraham,
the news right
bring
now.
Extra espresso for that episode, please. We need some cafecitos for that one.
But let me say this: Miami has what's called coquina way down, and they drill the way.
Isn't it like a banana daiquiri? Oh, that's coquito. That's like a holiday.
You're not supposed to make the jokes, okay? But they have coquina, and the coquina is so far down and it's drilled into that the building structure typically is not an issue. Does the building move potentially an inch or two over a period of time in the first 10, 15, 20 years? Yeah, it does. And sometimes you can see cracking, and sometimes if the cracking is in the wrong spots, you need to reinforce for sure, which is why these SARS studies are so important.
SARS is COVID.
Okay, I told you I'm not good at technical.
That's just the wrong word.
Okay, that's like cad and cat.
We're going to go to a break right now. We're going to welcome the president of the Brickell Homeowners Association and dig into these issues and what their perspective is on that. You're listening to Sun, Sand, and Soul with Josh Tomey and David Haber. Please join us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, X.
Instagram.
David loves to reinforce
X.
the X. He just says it.
Facebook.
X, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and pretty much everything you can think of. We'll be right back.